Hello and welcome to the Upgrade School Marketing Podcast, the podcast for busy school marketers. I am Matt Sold, Director of Marketing Communications at Chapel Hill Chauncey Hall School.
Hi, I'm Angie Ward. I am the founder and president of Enroll Media Group, a digital marketing agency for schools.
There we go. Angie, I hate to say it, but summer is just about over.
It is.
In some cases over. And
it flew by. I cannot
we had a thing here. It's kind of like an ongoing joke, I guess, but throughout the whole school year, whenever there's something like a big project going on, something that's like, it always gets put as like, that'd be we should check that out this summer. This summer we should do that. We'll do that this summer. And then we get into the summer and the list is just giant list of things to do. And the summer flies by and we're doing so. I don't know. Do you have your summer projects?
Yeah. I was going to write a blog this summer. I was going to do all the things and got none of them done. But we've been so busy helping schools that, our marketing efforts kind of come second to that. But I'm with you. The summer's usually that time I'm going to clean and organize my house and get things done professionally. And it flies by. But you know what? We had time to enjoy it. So I am grateful for the time I had to enjoy the sunshine when we had it, and I'm looking forward to the fall. It's actually one of my favorite seasons. So definitely, I'm looking forward to it.
It is definitely fall. New England is by far my favorite season for sure. So yes, we're into it. Planning open houses, planning events, planning fundraisers. So, just as a future podcasts, anyone who has we're talking open house promotion, we're talking marketing. Kind of going into the school year. So if anybody has any ideas or things that they'd like to hear about, for sure, reach out to us. And today we have an exciting one.
We do. We have Michael Shaver from the Association of Boarding Schools. He's a great guy, and we've been meaning to have him as a guest for a while. We finally have him today for you. Michael's the VP of Marketing and Information Management for TABS. Michael leads the association's global marketing and communication efforts to help families understand the power of boarding and why boarding school might be the right fit for their family. In addition, Michael works closely with TABS member schools to understand student recruitment trends and to develop data-driven strategies that can expand their applicant pool. Prior to joining TABS, Michael worked in educational recruitment strategies around the world. He has a bachelor's degree in international marketing and Japanese, as well as a master's degree in technology. He's taught college courses at Eastern Illinois University and Rochester Institute of Technology, as well as in university in Worms, Germany. Michael is also a boarding school parent. His eldest son is a boarding school graduate, and his younger son is currently in boarding school. So he certainly knows the market, and we're really excited to jump in to our conversation with Michael.
All right, welcome, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm well, Matt. Thank you for having me. This is actually my very first podcast, so I'm really excited to be participating. So I've participated and have written articles and blogs, but this will be my first podcast.
Awesome. We're excited to have you here for the first time. We'll make it fun. And we'll jump right into it too, because I know we've gone through, you have a lot to talk about and talking about international students. So the first thing I really wanted to just jump right in is, what's happening from your point of view in the international landscape for boarding schools here in the United States?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're in a very interesting period of time. Before COVID, I think we were starting to get a really strong pulse on different markets around the world, and we were seeing growth in Russia and Kazakhstan and Colombia. And then, of course, COVID comes in and kind of throws everything off. And we started to see some interesting anomalies. We saw an exponential growth in applications from Brazil. And then we started to see the decline of applications from China. And so I think this being kind of the second year back for marketing and recruitment efforts for international students, I think we're going to start to get a better sense of whether that COVID bump or dip, depending on what you experience, is over, or will those actually be longer lasting trends? I think everybody is asking about China and has an interest in China. And so we have done some surveying and looked at some data with our schools. And what we have seen in Chinese application numbers pre-COVID versus basically post-COVID is that yes, there was a decrease in application numbers to our boarding schools. About 70% of our boarding schools saw a decrease in applications from China, and then another 20% said they remained about the same. And so we really only had about 10% of our schools that saw a significant growth. And so as we look at the data more, what we're starting to see is that even though we've had a decline, we actually still have plenty of applications to go around. The challenge is those Chinese applications are not distributed throughout our membership. So, many of our the schools that had tons of Chinese applications prior to COVID are still getting a ton of applications and even more. And then other schools are declining. So for me, in my role, what I am looking at is when we're focusing on China and marketing out to China, that we need to help Chinese families understand about fit, about how to find the right school, and then also help schools tailor their messaging and their value proposition to Chinese families.
Got it. That makes sense. And that will kind of diversify, where the applications are going and help some of those other member schools. Yeah.
That's what we're hoping.
Got it. Now, in the, tabs data that you guys have been able to pull together, is anything jumping out to you as kind of a clear trend in terms of other locations that are seeing increases in applications here for the U.S. boarding schools?
Like I said, we saw a big growth in applications from Brazil. We're still waiting to see if what factors that played. But I think no surprise to anyone, and the country I get the most questions about is India. And we are seeing growth in interest for boarding schools in India. We're not seeing a growth in applications yet. But when we look at our boardingschool.com analytics, India continues to be moving up the chart based on the interest. What is interesting with India is that it's what I call a reverse market. So student recruitment for India started with PhD programs, and now it's gone down to masters, and that's really the bulk of kind of the recruitment in India. We're starting to slowly see the trickle down into bachelor's degrees. So I don't think we're at a phase where we will see significant applications for K through 12 or boarding schools. I think we're at the infancy stage where, as tabs, we are trying to lay the groundwork for future efforts. So just helping families understand what is boarding school, why should a family look at boarding school as an option for their education. And so that's where we're moving. Not saying that a school couldn't get applications from India. I just don't think it's a significant market yet. Another thing that is interesting, as we start to get applications from India, I think what we're going to see are many of the students having dual citizenship. Many of the students because it was a reverse market, many of the students that are going to be boarding school age, and we're even seeing this in higher ed, were born in the US while their parents were doing a master's or PhD program. So I think that's going to be an interesting factor as the India market grows. Another country I think that is really interesting is we are starting to see a regrowth in Japan. So Japan was a very significant market for boarding schools in, I would say, the 80s, 90s, and then had dipped off in the late 90s and early 2000s. But as we look at the data and as we talk to families, what we're seeing is the students that went to boarding school in the 80s and 90s are now parents, and they want their children to have a similar experience. So I think we're gonna, as we see more and more of our alum become parents, we're gonna see an increase in the Japanese market. Also, we're starting to see an increase or more of an interest in junior boarding schools in the Japanese market.
Oh, okay.
And then I think for me, some of the countries I'm keeping an eye on, because I think we're going to see more and more opportunities, are countries like Albania, Azerbaijan, Rwanda, Bangladesh, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Guyana. So I definitely think there are some emerging markets that we're maybe not going to see in the next couple of years, but will be, I would say, rising markets a little further into the future.
Wow, that's great. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's already, I think a good to-do item already out of this is to go back into alumni from Japan back in the 80s and 90s. I'm going to do this after this to go through and see. But that's a really good, that could be a really good targeted campaign right there to find those alumni from that span of years and outreach with them. So with all the, there's a lot of countries that are, sort of on the list to kind of to keep an eye on and to outreach to. Do you have any recommendation as far as like how schools are using their digital marketing in general with international students?
Yes, we're getting more and more questions about digital marketing. I actually think it's a new frontier for a lot of the boarding schools. Up until COVID, everything was in person. We did in-person fairs, they did in-person interviews, etc. And then COVID hit and we had to move to virtual or digital. And I still think it's a growing interest and area for boarding schools. And so I'm getting more and more schools asking about CRMs, about drip campaigns, social media, analytics, and even website advice. We get a lot of questions about, should we translate our whole website into 6 different languages? And I usually tell them, I don't think you need to do all that work. It's expensive. It's a lot of work. But what I do encourage schools to do is maybe create one page on their website that is in a local language and targeted to parents in that country. So you have one page in Vietnamese that is targeted at Vietnamese parents. And I see some interest there because a lot of times the students may speak English, but the parents don't. And so having some information that you've kind of collated from all your different pages that really speak to parents and putting that in their local language, I think can be really helpful. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of growth and obviously a lot of interest in how to use GA4 and other analytic tools.
I really love that concept of having a landing page in the native language of that country, because you think about when you're traveling as well, having a QR code on that postcard, they can scan, that goes right there, put a UTM code on that, see, where, people came from, as opposed to just seeing it as direct. You can actually see what postcard they scanned, or business cards. We see that as well. People putting those QR codes right on their business cards. So it's a really great opportunity for that ed consultant perhaps to link in their profile to some of these school pages in that native language as well.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm a Google Analytics geek, so I
know we had you present to our schools, and I even learned stuff in that presentation. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I've been on this kind of GA4 world tour, I feel like. But one of the things that's jumping out to me for some of our partner schools are all these, some of the countries that you mentioned, like we're seeing rises in website traffic from different countries around Brazil and Argentina. And it's just amazing to me to think about, okay, well, what are these families doing? And what does that experience look like? They're going to the home page and then they're going to the international admissions page. And sometimes it's just one very short page and it just talks a lot about the application process and not the actual value of the experience they'll get there, getting an education there. So those are some great tips. I'd love to just ask you, what other questions are you getting from your member schools? What's TAB seeing in terms of questions that schools have around marketing or just in general? What's the pulse and what are schools needing at this time?
Like I said, I think a lot of it is schools wanting to learn how to use data more effectively. I think a trend that we are going to see in admissions practice is the shift away from reliance on 1 or 2 countries to an admissions practice where we need to reach out to students in a lot of different countries. And how do we do that? Probably without increased staff and without an increased budget. And I think digital marketing has to be the answer to that. And so a lot of questions around digital marketing and analytics and how do we tailor our marketing and our communications to those different cultures, and what are those different cultures and countries looking for, what's important to them, how do we segment them out. And I think that's really what schools are looking at, is they're realizing international recruitment is not a one size fits all. The way that you engage with a student from, or a family from China versus a family from Mexico or Brazil is going to be very different. They have different factors that they're looking at. They have different wants, different needs. And I think schools are starting to realize that, and then thinking about how can we use digital marketing to reach more students in more countries.
So if you were to give one thing that's most important for schools to do this fall, as we're going into the fall, every school I'm talking to is super focused on international, whether it's, like what we're saying, like how do you get the right message out, or what should we be on, like what platform should we be on, like, all these different things. But if you were to give one thing that is just a top level thing that somebody who is in my seat, school marketing at a school right now, should be focused on and should be doing, what would you say that is?
It's data. Looking at any data you can get your hands on, analyzing it, seeing how it is applicable to your school and your marketing efforts. And then I think from there, schools need to be very strategic about the countries that they are going to target. Like I said, it's not a one size fits all. So if you are saying we are going to target Brazil and Nigeria, you need to create separate campaigns, separate processes for each of those countries, so that you can ensure that you are investing in efforts that are going to be a better return on investment. I don't think we're past the phase where you can just put a general post on Facebook and assume it's going to just speak the same to families around the world, because it doesn't. Families are looking at different things around the world. Now, there are some things that are pretty ubiquitous across like families when they think about factors. College placement is always huge. Safety is always a big concern. Academic programs and opportunities are a big concern. But I think even within those, there are factors that families are thinking about that schools aren't always thinking about. So the question I get from families specifically around safety is, yes, we know this campus is safe. They have a fence around, or they have security guards, etc. But what happens to my student when they go to the mall on the weekend? Or what happens when they're walking down the street? So they want to know not necessarily about the on-campus safety. Yes, that's important, but what's the community around the campus? How supportive are they? And I think those are factors that schools can focus on. I'm also surprised at how impressed many international families are with facilities. And I think schools take this for granted. Many of our international families can't even fathom facilities that are better than universities in their own country. And many of our campuses are on par with top universities here in North America. And I think we need to move away from, we're on 500 beautiful acres in New Hampshire or wherever, and focus on, this is our science facility. This is, different things like that families, that I think we take for granted, that they don't know what they don't know. And then I think the last two are a little more intangible, and I think it is the intangible benefits, like the independence that students get, the social skills, the conflict resolution skills. I think those are really important to think about when you're marketing to international families. And then the last one I would say is belonging. And what is the campus culture like? And talking specifically to that, how are students, especially international students, supported on campus? What about food, etc.? And so, like Angie, what you were saying is that usually it's just one basic page that this is how the application process is different for international students. I really think we need to move into a place where we have international student pages that are more built out and are talking to factors and questions that international students specifically have.
I
Can
love
I
that.
can I follow up
Yeah.
with just one thing on that? Just I know you're talking about just like the things they're looking for, and we've talked about like digital marketing, but one thing that like always comes up to me, and I always, it's hard to measure, but I always assume that this is like one of the most powerful things we can do, and it's word of mouth with current students, with alumni, with current families that you have on your campus. But it's always tricky. You're working on time zones, you're working with languages, you're working all across the board. So I didn't know if you had any sort of best practices or some wins that other schools have had, or anything that you've seen that would really be good for schools to know in terms of how you can amplify your word of mouth internationally.
Yeah, I always tell schools, if you can, connect students and parents with parents. Whether you have an ambassador program, especially if you can connect, same country to same country. If not, at least try to connect region to region, and have those opportunities. I think alumni are a great asset. They're a lot of times in the country. Can they do some information sessions? I think you need to make sure that you are training them properly, that they're not too far removed from the school, because your school back in the 60s or 70s is probably very different than it is now. And so making sure that they have the right understanding. But I always say, if you can connect students with students and parents with parents, that's gold.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a lot of great tools out there that can help with that as well. You can kind of find these plugins to add on to the website or through your email marketing campaign, give contact information through those ambassadors. I also wanted to mention there's some great websites out there. When we look at the data, when we're looking at Google Analytics data, Study International, Finding School, US Boarding Schools, Boarding School Review, all of those great websites, really lean into those because they have heavy international use. And so really making sure that you're calling out the things that you mentioned, Michael. It's a balance. It sounds like it's a balance of outcomes and what your student will get, but also making sure you're balancing that with the experience, as well as something as simple as the facilities and the state-of-the-art STEM center. And also, what else is around. So I think one of the things that we see is parents looking to know, okay, where's the nearest city? Where's the nearest airport? Like, you're in New York State, but what does that look like for somebody if you're upstate New York versus the city? And so definitely calling out the location as well. There have been a lot of tips here in this conversation around, what to market and sort of what to say and how to stand out. In terms of the platforms that you can do so, I think I would agree that it's your website and those landing pages. Those are a great place to start. And once you have those bones in place, then you can really start to market even more, like build those specific postcards, maybe put together a paid advertising campaign. A lot of these countries use Google, and you can simply run a Google Ads campaign or Meta campaign if they're using Facebook and Instagram. So I just wanted to mention we're seeing some success there in the advertising space, but it goes so much further when you have that page that speaks to all of these things. So those were some great pieces of advice there.
Add in, for any TABS member schools, we have boardingschools.com, which sees over 100,000 visitors every year, and schools can update their profiles at any time. And so they can go in and add in some of these factors that maybe they haven't talked about previously, or add in new videos or add in new photos of things that might be more important to international families.
Yes, that's great. What a great resource for the member schools. Do you have any other final tips or advice before we close out this podcast today?
I think, like I say, I'm big on data right now. So we are really, TABS, myself, I think everybody right now is really focused on data. I think we're at a place where we're going to see bigger changes in markets, and them happening even faster than they have before, with currency, with politics, with a lot of different factors. So I think the more you can try to stay up to date with data and trends, the more effective your marketing can be.
Great. And are there any we talked a little bit about like you can't just put a message on Facebook and all that. Are there any platforms internationally that you've seen that are kind of like having more weight to them that schools should be looking at, like making sure that they're publishing to or subscribe to or are on?
You say TikTok.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, last year was, I think, the first year that we saw a big increase in boarding schools using TikTok for marketing. I think everybody is now thinking threads and what do we do there? And then obviously in some countries, in some regions, you do have specific platforms, WeChat, QQ, Line, WhatsApp, that if you are marketing countries that use those platforms, make sure that you are on there and that you have done that research, and make sure that you kind of understand how you can use it to the best of your ability. For example, WeChat, if you're not in mainland China, your functionality is much more limited than somebody who is using it from mainland China. And so some schools have then hired somebody in China to run their WeChat platform. So just kind of doing research along those lines.
Michael, so people who want to hear more from you, how can they get in contact with you?
So the first place I would go is tabs.org. My information is there. Plus we have some resources that are available for people to look at. But if you want to reach out to me directly, my email is shaver@tabs.org. And so those are the best ways to get a hold of me or my colleagues.
Wonderful. And we know that Tabs is going to be out and about. We've got the annual conference in Boston. Matt and I are in the Boston area, so we will be there. And you also have some international travel coming up as well, right?
Yes, we'll be holding international fairs mid-September through mid-October in China, Vietnam, Japan, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for being here, Michael. And I look forward to seeing you in Boston. And we hope to connect again and do another podcast sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to hearing from some of the listeners and working with the both of you again in the future.
There's so much in there from Michael. Thank you again, Michael, for making us your first podcast that you've ever been on. You did amazing. I have my notes here from just that talk are huge. I have so much to put here, and we're going to put it all on the site. So if you're listening to this somewhere, make sure to go to the site where you'll get to see a lot of the resources from some of the landing pages or the different resource pages that he mentioned. So that'll all be on there. But thank you so much. I think it is useful, actionable, hopeful information to go into this fall with and to really make that international student recruitment plan.
Yeah, Michael had so many great things to offer on that podcast. Thanks again, Michael. Before we close out today's episode, we do have an A+ of the episode, and this week's A+ goes out to the team at St. Andrew's School in Boca Raton, Florida. Carlos did an amazing job working on their new website. It just launched. You guys can check it out at standrews.net. We will link to St. Andrew's new beautiful website, as well as all the resources we talked about today on upgradeschoolmarketing.com. And I'm personally really excited for St. Andrew's School. Final Site did the website. Carlos put a lot of work into it. When you check it out, you'll know it really just kind of tells a story about the school. And I think it really reflects their brand really well. I'll actually be presenting at the TABS annual conference with St. Andrew's School. We're going to be talking about Bing ads and how they can be included in an overall digital marketing strategy. So I'll be with the team there this fall as well at the TABS conference.
That was a seamless A+ into a plug. That was perfect.
Yes.
Well done. Well done. You're good at this. So thank you all. Yeah. And congratulations, St. Andrews. The site looks amazing. And thank you everybody for listening, watching, and make sure, join us on LinkedIn. You can follow along. You can give comments and future topics that you'd love to hear, and to subscribe on the website so you get first notice when we publish a new episode. Thank you again for listening.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.